The Gulf crisis comes at a moment of extraordinary, tragic volatility, not only on the battlefield, but across global energy markets and the strategic calculations of elites in major powers. For India, the crisis underscores a delicate balancing act. Delhi is deepening defense and technology cooperation with Israel, while maintaining critical energy ties across the Gulf and navigating complex relationships with Washington, Moscow, and Tehran. As emerging powers pursue greater strategic autonomy and global alliances continue to evolve, the conflict raises broader questions about the future of energy security, geopolitical alignment, and the shape of the multipolar world of this century. I'm joined now by GAF TV's social media head, Farhaan Ahmed, to examine what this crisis reveals, not just about West Asia, but how this global power itself is being recalibrated. Farhaan, thanks so much for coming on New Order. Let's just look at the impact, say, on India. 90% of their oil, half of them come through the Straits of Hormuz. What sort of impact, say, on India is this conflict having?
I mean, it's not sunk in yet, but if I were to compare it with anything, I'd compare it to the impact the COVID pandemic had on India, which was stark. Obviously, we're in the early days of this conflict, but if we go back to COVID, we saw incomes drop by 48%. We saw 800 million Indians rely on government food aid to get by. We also saw about 75 million, I believe, pushed into poverty. So India is, like many other major economies in the world, very, very sensitive to big changes in geopolitics and big instability in geopolitics. At the end of the day, the same drivers of an economic crisis apply to India: inflation, rising production costs, and of course, India is trying to increase its manufacturing base. It's trying to increase its manufacturing in the tech and AI sector. So rising energy prices is particularly not good, and especially the fact that it is so reliant on the Gulf. India is facing what could be an unprecedented economic crisis.
Yeah. I mean, Russia, say, is going to presumably do quite well out of this war, even as Russia desperately tries and seeks to end the war. And it co-authored, it abstained at the UN Security Council with China. China, of course, also, like India, very similarly dependent on energy resources. But I can't quite make out whether there's evidence for the fact that Iran is allowing Russia and Chinese energy resources to flow through the Straits of Hormuz, but not India, or are they allowing Indian fuel to get through? There's some debate over the Thai ship explosion in the Straits.
So from what's been reported, there was a Thai ship this week that was heading to the port in Gujarat, with oil obviously on board, and that was fired upon. Now, the Indian Foreign Ministry did not make clear who fired upon that, but I think you're not going to win a Pulitzer Prize for saying that it could be Iran. I've also seen
actually these days you never know.
Or Trump.
And Iran continually says it isn't them. Like it for instance.
It very well could be. I mean, the CIA, the US has a history of planning false flag operations, and of course, the more nations that kind of join in this coalition, the US-Israel axis to go to war against Iran. It's actually quite funny. I was reading on social media a couple of days ago. Someone, it is speculation, but it is in the US habit to do this, which is to almost pull in as many countries as possible and then just sell weapons to them and have them fight the war for you. But from the reports that I've seen, that Chinese vessels are being allowed through, and they are marking very clearly in communications with Coast Guards, etc., that they are Chinese-owned or Chinese crew on board. So it appears that there's at least a few Chinese ships being allowed through, but the vast majority of traffic is still stuck. And as time goes by, Iran's negotiating position when it comes to negotiating with the US and with the rest of the world, to be honest, the leverage goes further and further to Iran's side through asymmetric warfare.
Yeah, but I suppose it goes to their side as well if they can negotiate the passage of ships belonging to multipolar BRICS powers specifically, because otherwise, frankly, India will have to look to to Russia even, I mean, its traditional ally, but will it have to look at Russia even more for energy supplies and less to Gulf countries, because they'll foresee that the Gulf is much more in tune and much more tied to United States interests and therefore the interests of war?
I mean, for sure, in the short term. I mean, energy policy tends to radically shift as the months and years progress. I mean, you see big announcements of a country switching to purchasing LNG from another country or etc. But at the end of the day, in the era we live in, this does tend to fluctuate. So at least in the short term, they will look to Russia for oil exports. But at the same time, if you just look geographically, at the end of the day, the Gulf is very close to India. It's a very short route to get the oil from the Gulf into India. And of course, India has quite complex ties with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, Qatar, all of the Gulf countries. So I don't think it would be a sort of complete clean break, but you may see the percentages just fluctuate on like with an increase of the purchase of Russian crude. I would like to say on that point, though, that the Americans frame this as allowing the Indians to buy Russian crude. And so what India really has to look out for in the future is to not have its energy policy pressured and manipulated in the way that it has been by the United States over the last several months.
Yeah, so actually, could this, and I mean, we haven't got time to talk about the arms trade implications of the war, but isn't it a particularly important time when India could convene some kind of BRICS summit, because it's close to Israel, it's close to Iran, the north-south corridor through Chabahar? Isn't this an ideal time to convene a conference? It also shares now some of the concerns that China does, very similarly interested in energy supplies for their being the economies of this century.
I mean, first of all, I got to say, so far, BRICS has been just completely missing in action. Obviously, Venezuela, its head of state kidnapped, its first lady kidnapped by the United States. You now have a BRICS member state's head of state assassinated. And you have Iran, a BRICS member state, firing on the UAE, another BRICS member state. So from pretty much day one, there should have been some sort of collective BRICS action to bring this together. Now, with India, in terms of foreign policy, when it comes to major diplomatic initiatives to end conflicts, we've not really seen India all that involved. Like even with the Ukraine proxy war that's going on now, China presented a detailed peace plan. India, after 4 years, has not. This could be a chance for India to dramatically take it up to the next level when it comes to foreign policy, to geopolitics. If it actually chooses to get involved as a mediating actor, it could push India to another level in terms of a serious diplomatic actor that has the capability of de-escalating different crises around the world. I mean, I'm sure they're going to be popping up over the next couple of decades as well. So it'd be in India's interest to definitely mediate, and I think that it potentially could. The only problem I see is...
Fine, I'll stop you there. More from our head of social media on New Order after this break. Welcome back to New Order. I'm still here with Farhaan Ahmed, our head of social media. Farhaan, I interrupted you halfway through when you were just talking about BRICS and how it's not been a great war for BRICS, but perhaps India could become a player for the first time in a major geopolitical situation.
I mean, just to finish up that point, it should, and it definitely should convene. As I said, that BRICS action on this has been pretty much nothing, and it's a bit late now. But it definitely should convene some form of negotiations under the BRICS umbrella. Because at the end of the day, if BRICS can't protect these grand plans of multipolarity, if they can't even mediate between their own members, if they can't even, if a head of state of a BRICS member is assassinated, if they can't do anything on that, then how does BRICS look to the rest of the world in these changing times? It doesn't want to look at us impotent. So it is on India to start, as it's chairing BRICS this year, it's on India to start some diplomatic initiatives.
And on the implications of the war, this tragic war, it's clear that NATO sanctions have, I think one estimate has it, 38 million killed over a particular period. I know you know that statistic very well, by the United States because of US sanctions. Iran is now showing that a global South power, through choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, can act as powerfully as these economies of NATO that impose sanctions on other countries. Do you think India will learn from that and see that actually all the weaponry in the world, buying it from the United States, is not going to save any country in this world, as you said, of asymmetric warfare?
I mean, they certainly should, because at the end of the day, yesterday Venezuela, today Iran, tomorrow, why could it not be India? Why could it not be China? Why could it not be Russia? At the end of the day, what Iran has done, even though it has perpetrated actions which have been condemned across the region, but also by China, like with the strikes on Gulf countries. But what Iran has known is that it can't fight this war symmetrically. It stands no chance. At the end of the day, the only thing it really has to get remotely any sort of equal leverage with the Americans is to create chaos for global capitalism, which America relies on. At the end of the day, Iran is largely cut out from global capitalism as, compared to a nation not under sanctions. So it doesn't really have as much to lose here. And so it's able to disrupt global capitalism, which obviously puts extreme pressure on the U.S. economy and the Western European economies. But India is not immune, and India should not see itself as immune. At the end of the day, with current economic projections, China is going to be the number one economic power of this century, and India close behind by 2075. America will not allow a near-peer competitor or a competitor to overtake it. And if India is on the way to surpassing the United States, then it should start to take its deterrence very seriously.
So India better be aware that just because they're buying billions of dollars worth of weapons from the military-industrial complex of the United States doesn't make it immune to the kind of pressures China is feeling if and as India economically progresses.
I mean, of course not. I mean, the U.S. I forget the name of the official that was sent to a summit in India, who said that we won't let India grow to dominate these markets. We won't allow India to get to the position where it can. So the U.S. is framing very openly with its language that it's just simply not going to accept a near-peer economic competitor. And India still has a ways to go, but as trajectories show, it's going to eventually get to that point. And buying U.S. goods and U.S. oil and U.S. products, that doesn't count as something that would keep India immune from this. At the end of the day, anyone that has anyone trying to build the same kind of economic not leverage, but position in the world as the United States, they will be under the threat of the US's entire arsenal. That's what it was built to defend. It was built to defend America's position.
So if we ignore the messianism of the religious extremists like the Huckabees of this world, if the United States can withstand the pressure with its strategic oil reserves and all other sorts of nefarious methods, this war could also not just be about religion, about trying to do whatever Israel tells elites in Washington. It could be underhandedly a way to destroy competing powers of the future.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think that, as much as we like to make fun of the chaos of Trump's foreign policy and, the way it's going right now with Iran is just, bomb and let's see what happens. But at the end of the day, I'm sure it came into their calculations that, this is going to hit, of course, the US, it's going to hit Western Europe, but it's also going to hit the rising powers of the world as well. Particularly, in fact, the GCC. The GCC was moving towards far more independent relationships with Russia, with China, and even with Iran since 2023, since Beijing brokered that deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which opened a new era of cooperation. So I'm sure it did come into their calculations that some rising powers and rising poles of the multipolar world would get hurt by this. And I would not be surprised if that was in their thinking when they launched this war. Because at the end of the day, everything going along as, status quo. The Gulf states with, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 was having quite a lot of success. The UAE's GDP growing at 5% a year. India's economy growing majorly. And China's, of course, exports have skyrocketed since the trade war began. Trump has essentially lost this trade war as the world becomes more dependent on Chinese exports. So I would see that as it's definitely part of their calculations.
Unless the master plan backfires and India realizes it has the same concerns as Pakistan, Bangladesh. Obviously, it has been with China. It realizes, like all these other countries realize, they have to start thinking about themselves together against the American hegemon, because the United States just goes into one war after another, even with an anti-war president. At least he was elected on that platform.
I mean, again, I would definitely implore them to realize the extent of the threat. That doesn't mean spend 20% of your budget on the military, but this is about building these alliances and building structures. At the end of the day, if the multipolar world does not have institutions, if it does not have agreements to protect all of these major economic plans that are being put into effect, they're not safe if the U.S. can just come in and say, well, we're bombing. We're just gonna bomb it, because that's kind of what's happened with Venezuela and Iran. China signed 2 big strategic partnerships with Venezuela and Iran. I mean, what's the state of those strategic partnerships right now? It's pretty much non-existent. So if all of these players in the multipolar world are just rendered defenseless, and this is just some sort of economic project, well, you can't divorce economics from politics, and you certainly can't divorce economics from geopolitics. So, as I said, unless there's some form of defense of this economic project towards multipolarity, then of course they remain vulnerable.
Can you understand why some of these countries, the GCC countries, India, have felt, though historically, just finally, that it's been good to be close to the United States, given its power? That's the best way forward, as it is the hegemon, rather than do what you just said.
I mean, of course, and again, every country is going to have to balance relations. This is not a thing of cut out the United States completely. At the end of the day, the US is a pole of the multipolar world, but you have to understand the position that the US is in. It no longer has the economic dominance to impose hegemony through soft power and then through hard power in parts of the global south. Now it's in a state where the US is battling to keep its hegemony and is very open that it will use bombs and bullets to enforce it and to retrench it. So in a sense, I would say that for powers like India, for rising powers at the end of the day, they have to balance with the US, because at the end of the day, the US is the center of global capitalism, which is understandable, and it's the largest market in the world, and nations make a lot of money selling their products to the United States, doing business with the United States. But at the end of the day, to protect themselves, diversification and deterrence towards the multipolar world, towards the East and the global South, it only leads to benefits for them, to avoid over-reliance and to avoid being attacked, as we've seen.
Farhaan, Ahmed, thank you.